Hi everyone, I'm Kevin J. Kennedy, and this is the Horror Show. And tonight I have with me author David Moody. David's pretty well known for his Autumn series and his Hater series. There's a few other books out as well, and we're going to have a wee chat about them this evening. How you doing, David?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, cheers for having me here. We've been communicating for a long time, but I've never properly spoken, have we? I don't think so. It's
Well,
good.
it's been nice, this show. I mean, this is the fourth episode, and I've spoke to
Mhm.
authors originally through emails back before sort of social media, and then over the years through Facebook and things like that. But it's nice to
Mhm.
actually be able to sit and have a chat with people that I've been reading for quite some time. So I'd obviously discovered you through Autumn, which for anybody who doesn't know is a well, was that your first or was that your second book actually?
Well, that was my second book. So
Second book.
to start with, I wrote a book. This is the thing that scares me now. When I have these conversations, I'm talking 30 years ago when I wrote my first book, Straight to You, uh, and um, and it was great, and I was happy to have finished the book, and it got published. It got picked up by a very small publisher who did absolutely nothing with it.
Yeah.
And then I wrote Autumn, and so I got this second book finished, and I thought, okay, what do I do with this? Do I try and shop it around? Bear in mind, this is the '90s, so the internet was only just taking off, and
Yeah.
trying to get a book deal was a very different thing. I thought, do I just keep shopping it around and try to get the same thing, or do I actually try and get people interested in it? So I went online for the first time and just started giving it away for free, and that's where it all took off from. I know that doesn't sound. Everybody does that these days, giving books away
Yeah.
for free. It's part of the author's marketing playbook, isn't it? But back in the day, yeah, it was unusual to say the least, and it kind of
Yeah.
snowballed. And I was getting the kind of numbers of downloads that I wish I was still getting today. It was crazy back in the early days.
It went massive, didn't it?
It did. Yeah, it was really strange. I think I was talking to somebody about this the other day. It was really weirdly, it was I think it was the guy was Slovakian, and he wrote and he ran a landscape photography group in Slovakia. Um, and he was a zombie fan, and he got hold of Autumn, and he was telling me about the very early ebook formats that you could use, and so he helped me convert it. And it's all down to this guy in Serbia or Slovakia, sorry, finding this book and sharing it with his group, and then some of the other people were into it, and other people were into it, and I don't know where it came from, but it snowballed, and it went crazy. And I thought, well, this is working. I wasn't making any money from it, but people were at least reading my stuff. And I'd always got in mind that it was going to be a long form story, so I started writing sequels, and then paid, and people were starting paying for them. And that's where it kind of went from.
Yeah. And you mentioned that a while back you put well, I don't want to say a story, but when I done my only non-fiction book, Inside the Indie Horror World, you spoke
Yeah,
a little bit about that, and I think you described it. I don't know if it was in the book or when I was speaking to you at one point. You said you'd kind of hit a wave, and
yeah,
everything just sort of went for there. And zombies, um, everything comes in and out of fashion. I've been talking to people recently about. I had wrote a zombie novel alongside Gord Rollo and um, Simon Clark, and I'd put a zombie a vampire
yeah.
anthology out as well. And I think people were bored of vampires for a while, but the zombies were the big thing for ages. I think you had mentioned things like Dawn of the Dead. Was it the remake? And a few other movies were coming
Yeah,
out round
yeah,
about that
and
time as well. Was it 28
and that
Days
was
Later,
it.
maybe?
Yeah, I did hit it very lucky because back at that time when I was starting to give Autumn away for free, people were, as you say, suddenly getting into zombies, and it was when we had Zack Snyder's remake of Dawn of the Dead, which should have been terrible but was great.
Yeah,
And then yeah, 28 days later as well, which was obviously absolutely huge, and that's still resonating today because we've got 28 years later being filmed at the moment. I'm
yeah.
looking forward to. There's a trilogy of those films I think coming
I
out
was
starting
just going
next
to
year.
say, I seen that they're saying it was going to be a trilogy, so that would
Yeah,
be interesting at least. It'll
so
be
I
worth a
think
watch.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Zombies, they kind of go in and out of fashion, but unlike vampires, unlike other kind of monsters, I think they've hung around a little bit more. They were out of fashion for a long, long time,
Yeah,
but then in the early 2000s, when it all kicked off again, they kind of got into the public psyche, and I don't think they've ever gone, because there's so much you can do with a zombie. That sounds like a really bad thing to say, but you know what I mean. You can put them in any situation. You can do anything with them, and
Yeah,
they're just so adaptable as a movie villain, or as a story villain. The downside to that is I think they're easy to do wrong, and I'm
yeah,
not saying that I do it right, but I think that because they're so easy to do, if you want to make a zombie film, just get your mate, put a bit of blue paint on his face, and then throw some blood around, and there's your zombie film. But so I think it's the default for people who think, oh, I'll make a horror film, or I'll write a horror book. But there's a lot more to the genre, I think, than a lot of people give it credit. For me,
yeah.
it's still the most
I think
terrifying thing.
when yourself had started obviously bringing the books out and zombies were getting bigger and there was some movies and things like that, I think a lot of people then decided to do zombie books as well.
Yeah.
And it's like you say, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. I've read some amazing zombie books and I've read some really terrible zombie books. And I think that,
Mhm.
there was a lot of books where it had characters where you didn't really care about the characters if they lived or died, and then sort of people going through the motions being killed off by zombies that were everywhere.
Mhm.
You kind of think, well, that story's definitely been told. I suppose it's what you do a bit more than that. It's you get a lot of people
Yeah.
that are try to jump the bandwagon, and it's selling well, so they want to do it.
Mhm.
You can't just put zombies
That
in a story. And
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it's interesting because that's really where the idea for Autumn came from. Because although there wasn't the same level of interest in zombies back in that at that time, um, we'd still got Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, and there was still plenty of things that you could hunt out, and they all seemed to be very formulaic. They were all following the same beats, and like for example, at some point somebody's going to get bitten and they're going to hide it from all their mates until the worst possible moment, and then they're going to
yeah,
turn, and it's going to, it's all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to avoid it, and
yeah,
so I wanted to write a kind of plausible, a believable zombie story. So it's very different. I took a lot of hate for it to start with, because
right,
people see the word zombie. Not that I use that explicitly in my marketing, but people see the word zombie and think, oh, I know what I'm going to get here. And with Autumn, they didn't get it. What
yeah,
they got was a really grim, quiet dystopia where on the first day, everybody's either dead and a zombie or they're not. And it's how this handful of survivors deals with literally millions of dead bodies, honing in on them because they're the only things left on the planet making any noise. Still
yeah.
freaks me out thinking about it. I love the idea of it, but yeah, a lot of people didn't, because there weren't any guns and there weren't any fights and so on and so on.
How many books did? Well, I suppose. Is there going to be any more in that series? Or are you done with it now?
I, that's a hard one to answer. I think I'm done. And the reason I say that is I think as far as the story goes, I wrote the original series was only intended to be 3 books. Um, I decided to go back and write a fourth, and I've written a book of short stories as well. And then the books got picked up by Thomas Dunn Books in America, so they wanted another novel. So I ended up writing 5 and a short story collection. Didn't do anything for about 20 years, and then a couple of years back, I was actually I went back to work for a while, and I was in the middle of London, and I thought if ever there was a place you didn't want to be when a zombie apocalypse kicked off, it's rush hour London. So I wrote a new trilogy of books then, the London trilogy, um,
Yeah,
which is just a self-contained story set in the same universe, but no overlap on the other books.
yeah,
And as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty much done. But I do have an idea for something, and if I do ever write it, because I've got 1,000 ideas for something, you know yourself probably, you got my to write pile is bigger than my to read pile. It's massive. Um, if I ever do get around to it, it'll be set like 30 years after the apocalypse, and it's what's left and what are people like and what are people doing and how is the life that they lead, these few people, how is that shaped by what happened before when the dead started to walk all those years ago. So
yeah.
I'm not ruling it out, but I've got too many things on the go at the moment. I think I probably will go back to it at some point, but in terms of the main books, they're all done.
Well, as I say, I think plenty of people will be happy to pick it up if you write something else in the series. So you mentioned quite a lot of zombie movies, and I've seen everything you've mentioned. I was a big fan of zombie movies, and there was sort of years, as you say, that for your Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Living Dead, and then you had the kind of Return of the Living Dead movies and Zombie Flesh Eaters and loads of other stuff. And then there probably wasn't anything for a while, and I remember going to the pictures to see the remake of Dawn of the Dead, and really I don't remember having seen any trailers before I went, and really wasn't expecting what we got, and it starts off really fast paced right into it. It's carnage, well, from my memory anyway.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah,
a lot of, as you said, everyone was quite formulaic. I can't even say the word, but was somebody got bit, and you knew they were going to hide it. They wouldn't tell anybody, and then they would eventually turn. And fast zombies obviously was a kind of a new thing. Everyone, they were kind of traipsing about, and fast zombies came along, and rage-filled zombies and everything. And that was really good. And I've loved zombie movies. Well, I don't think I've seen a great zombie movie for quite some time, if I'm honest. But I've loved them throughout my life. But was there any zombie books before you started? Was there anything you had read as well that inspired you, or that just made you think, well, I want to do a zombie book? Or was there any books that made you want to write? What sort of started you?
There is a book that really influenced me. Well, two books really that influenced me for writing Autumn, but they're not really zombie books. I guess one you could argue is kind of, and that's oh Christ, why can't I think of it now? I Am Legend. Sorry, what God, what a title to forget. I Am Legend.
Brilliant book.
It is. It's a brilliant book. Yeah, terrible film adaptations, but a brilliant book. And I just love the fact that you've got this one guy on his own, and he's the only bloke left. And there are all these. I think they're technically vampires in the book, but they still behave the way that zombies do. And I know it was a big influence on George Romero when he made Night of the Living Dead, the way that they congregate around him. So that was a real trigger for me. The other book that kind of got me thinking and influenced me was, I guess it was the first horror book I ever read, and that was Day of the Triffids.
Yeah.
So Day of the Triffids, for anybody who doesn't know, it's about carnivorous walking plants, which sounds ridiculous, but the way it's written, it makes it very plausible. And these things are cultivated because their oil is worth something. And everything's okay, and they're held in huge pens, but then something happens overnight and almost all of the population turns blind. And then it's kind of the hunter becomes the hunted, and the Triffids are out, and the blind people can't escape them. And again, it's something about the synchronicity of the two things, the fact that we've suddenly got these creatures in our midst, and then, oh shit, everybody's blind, nobody can see, everybody's running around in panic. It's those two things happening. And again, that kind of played into what I ended up writing with Autumn, where you've got just these ordinary people who, just a quirk of nature, they've got maybe something different genetically to most everybody else. They've survived, but everybody else has dropped dead, and then a couple of days later got up again. So those were really the two literary influences.
I've never read that. I'm positive there was an old movie, wasn't there?
Yeah, there's been a few adaptations.
I'm sure I enjoyed one of the old movies, and I'm talking when I was really, really young, probably about 10 or something like that.
If you want to look it up, there's three adaptations of Triffids. The first one is a really crappy 1950s film. Don't bother with that one. The latest one was a BBC adaptation. We had Eddie Izzard in for some bizarre reason, and that is equally terrible. But there's one from the 80s with an actor called John Duttine in a 6-part BBC series, and it's absolutely the business. It terrified me. You what, sorry?
It's maybe that I've seen it. As I say, it was a long time ago, but I'm sure I've seen it. And then, as I said, I was talking to Simon Clark, who was on. I'm sure he wrote. Because I've not read the first book, I've not read it. But was it Day of the Triffids you said? So think he
So
wrote Night of the
David
Triffids.
and Simon wrote Night, which is another great book. Yeah, I know
I've never
Simon
read
quite
it
well.
because and they're probably two books I will read at some point.
Yeah.
But it's just trying to get through everything. I've read quite a lot of Simon's books as well.
Yeah.
But you find another author and then you read a few of their books and you find somebody else, and it's trying to keep up with everybody.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's funny because one of the first episodes, I can't remember if it was Simon or Scott, we were talking about I Am Legend, and it was for the same reason. It was a kind of, are they vampires, are they zombies?
Yeah.
I've heard people saying that over the years, and the thing that, and I read I Am Legend a long time ago as well, and the thing I remembered about it was a kind of timeless book. I can't remember much in the book really letting you know when it was set. If you know what I mean, there was nothing. There was no. The world had ended. There was no tech. There was no anything to say. Well, that was happening in the 70s. That was happening in the 50s. You know, it was just kind of.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic read. It's a book I've recommended to quite a few people. And you mentioned the movie was a terrible adaptation.
There is one half decent one, to be fair, and that's the earliest adaptation. It's called Last Man on Earth, and it stars Vincent Price. Yeah.
The thing I noticed when I seen the Will Smith one, it was terrible. At the end of that, from memory, I think, did he find a utopia or something? I can't remember, but the ending of the book is a bit more bleak. And the way they explained, I don't really want to talk too much about the end of the book because some people still have to read it, and I don't want to give away the ending because I thought the ending of the book was perfect. I absolutely loved the way that Matheson ended it. And I can't fathom why, if you were going to make the movie, you would change the ending because it was brilliant.
But it all comes down to money, doesn't it?
I know, and people like happy endings. But I think the explanation of it was really happening was brilliant. So definitely a favourite book. So they inspired Autumn, but as you said, Autumn was your second book. So what inspired you to write? Were you a big reader for a young age? What kind of made you think I need to write my own thing?
I just wanted to tell, and it sounds really pretentious, but I just wanted to tell stories. What I really wanted to do was make films, but I left school at the end of the 80s, and it's a joke now when I look at my phone and I think, God, I could make a whole film with this. But back in the day, if you wanted to film anything, you were on video, and the technical requirements were really the technical ability that people had was pretty crap. I managed to save up my first salary from work and got myself a video camera, and it was this big thing that had to rest on my shoulder, and the quality was just awful, and it just didn't happen. So I ended up working for a bank, high street bank, and I thought, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make films. I've still got all these stories rattling around my head that I've been working on. So what do I do with them? And I just started writing. I'd always been pretty good at English. It was one of the things that one of my best subjects at school. And I had read a lot. I always had read a lot. So I started writing and had a few false starts, a few like rejected attempts. And then I remember it was the 1st of January, 1994. And I just said to myself, right, you're going to do it this year, a page a day, plan it all out, not going to go back and edit until you've finished a draft, and just see if you can get something. And then 6 months later, I got my first book, and it all kind of just snowballed from there. So I was kind of an accidental writer, but I'd say it was the only real way at the time of getting the stories that I'd got out there.
It's something I find really interesting. I've read. I read sort of when I was younger, point horror and things like that, which are kind of similar to Goosebumps, maybe a bit darker. Then when I was 15, I discovered the Richard Lehman book. He was my first sort of adult horror, and I read everything Richard had written before sort of finding anybody else. I was just captivated and thought, this guy's brilliant, and I'm just going to read all his books. But I love hearing how writers get into writing, because it's something that, even you read books and sometimes there's a foreword, there's an afterword. Sometimes you'll read on a Goodreads page a wee bit about an author, and you get these days it's easier to get to know authors. Everybody's in Facebook. People expect to know the authors that are reading their books. I've seen people talking about that. It's no, if you're not online, unless you're super famous already, then you're probably not going to be selling as many books as somebody that's chatting to people in all the book groups. People want that access. But as I say, I know I've spoken to people years ago who used to have to pen and paper, and they'd write a letter and post it away to an author if they wanted to talk to them. At the time I come along, I was able to find some authors' websites. Not every author had a website, but they would often have an email address and you could send them an email. And at that point, they probably weren't have been bombarded with people every day wanting some of them, because that free book thing wasn't really there. You just wanted to chat and say, listen, I read your book, it was brilliant. And I think we spoke about it a week or so ago. I had a very, very old email address for you.
You did.
The only reason it was for long before I had any involvement in the book world. So that was obviously at a time where I've dropped you an email to say I've read such and such, and it was fantastic. And that was how I used to find other authors. If I read 3, 4, 5 of your books and really liked them, I'd be thinking, he writes in a style I love. He must have similar taste to, me. And I'd be saying, well, who do you read? And, you'd maybe recommend something, and I'd go away and read a few of their books. So it's interesting to find out how people themselves began to, or I say put pen on paper, but, it's...
I'd be really surprised if anybody is at school and teacher says, "Oh, what do you want to do?" And they go down the line and it's, "I want to be a spaceman, I want to be a train driver." Nobody says, "I want to write books." I don't think. It's just something that happens. But once you start doing it, you can't stop, can you?
No, well, this is it. It's addictive. I mean, for myself, I probably don't write enough. I always sort of threaten to write more, but I get caught up in the anthologies and enjoy doing that as well. And if anything, it's in a sense easier, because if you're having a bad day or a bad week or whatever, and one of your favourite authors sends you a short story that they want to put in your book, it's quite nice to sit back and read that short story.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're having a really bad time and you're trying to write your own story, it can be difficult. So I suppose I'm probably a lot of the time taking the easy road. But something you said about you were really good at English at school. I probably stopped going to school frequently at the end of the second year. I don't know what that is in America, but basically you're about 13, 14-ish maybe. And I just wasn't enjoying it. And the only subject I did enjoy was English. Through third and fourth year, I probably went less and less, just sort of hanging about with my friends in the park. Some days I would actually only go into English. So I would dog the full day, but I'd go to the English class because I liked the teacher. He was a really interesting guy. He was quite well read, and he would talk about stuff with passion, which a lot of teachers just don't do. They're there for a wage and they hate their job and they're maybe unhappy and different things. And he you could tell he liked being a teacher. He taught English. He liked reading. He had interest in different types of literature. He didn't just try to tell you it was in the school curriculum. And I sort of bought into that. And I didn't write at that time or anything, but part of the big sort of exam at the end of fourth year was you had to write or one of the options was to write a story, and I wrote a short story for that, and it helped. I think it was a third year grade or something, and then never wrote again. But you said you kind of accidentally fell into it. 8 or 9 years ago, I just seen an advert on Facebook for a publisher says, "We're looking for horror stories. You don't have to have ever been published before." And it just happened at a time where I had a wee bit of spare time. And I'd always sort of joked it'd be great to have a wee story in a book, a wee short story in a book, just because I've got thousands of books, and I read a lot.
Yeah.
But I'd never any intention of writing anything. And then at that point, I just sat on the floor, sat with a laptop. I think the story was about 2,000 words, and it was about a carnival because I love carnival horror. And it got picked up, and it kind of went through there. And for about a year, I just started sending short stories. I was in a lot of horror groups. So if I'd see companies that were saying, we'll take new authors or indie authors or unpublished authors, whatever, I thought I'll give it a try. I like the theme, something that I enjoy. So I would, I like cannibal stories. So I'd write a cannibal story and send it in. And, I'd done that for about a year, and that was, I fell into it, as I say, accidentally. I'd spent probably about 2 hours on Facebook one day endlessly scrolling on my phone before I seen the advert, and I wasn't doing anything. And this is, I say, 8 or 9 years later now, and I get to work with most of my favourite authors, and I get to write about myself and put stories out there, and it was an accidental path, but it's worked out really favourably.
It's great, isn't it? I think kind of it sounds really pretentious, but if you're destined to do it, then the opportunity will present itself at some point, and you might not have seen that Facebook advert, but you might have seen another one a week later or 2 weeks later. It's just stars align because it's what you do.
My wife always says that, and I'm not sure I agree, but she always says I'm really good at manifesting. And I always think, no, I just work really hard at stuff. But
Yeah,
as funny as I say, I can remember being captivated with books for a young age. So, they used to in the UK, you get the Scholastic Books Fair, which used to be a sort of 4-page, almost like a magazine with loads of books. And then they'd roll these library shelves and wheels into the school, and you could save up every week a few pence. And then when they came, you could go and buy a book or two if you pick for the shelves. And even then, I'd always buy something horror-esque, which is
you and me both.
probably
Yeah,
strange for a kid. And then I always loved libraries, felt comfortable in libraries. I've always, as I say, then I got into adult horror, just collected it, bought loads, read loads. And then one day I ended up writing and publishing books. And nobody knew the internet was going to make. Whoever thought about Kindle? I know you were in the very early days of ebooks. But the market that came along, as you probably know, at first, a lot of authors didn't want to touch ebooks. I think, I read, I think it was Jeff Strand's non-fiction book about sort of his experiences. And he was one of the other sort of early guys into ebooks and things. And
I
he
remember
just said
talking
nobody
to
would touch it. It wasn't, nobody was interested, and he was kind of in there. And we spoke about like Blake Crouch and Jake and Wrath and Jack Kilborn, whatever you want to, his pseudonym. And these guys were in early and again have been wildly successful. It's amazing.
Yeah, because way back at the beginning, I remember first hearing about ebooks, and I was driving to London for a really shitty 2-week course when I was working for the bank, and it was just the worst thing. I'm thinking, I don't want to be doing this. And there was a news bulletin on the radio, and it said, "Oh, and the latest thing apparently is ebooks, books that you can read on your computer." And I was thinking, it's never going to take off, but that sounds interesting. And it kind of just kept coming back to me, and then I ended up, as I mentioned earlier, this guy from Slovakia, who got an interest in it, and Microsoft had an ebook format back in the day. It was Lit. That's what it was called, Lit, short for literature. And there was PDFs, and there were Palm Pilots, old computers, and various other things like that. So there were all these different formats and Rocket ebooks, and loads of different companies competing for space in the market. And eventually, obviously, a company called Moby Pocket did really well, and Moby Pocket got bought out. It was a French company, and eventually they got bought out by Amazon, and the Moby Pocket technology became the foundation for Kindle, which is why until
that'll
not
be why
long
it's a
ago,
Moby file.
it used to be a Moby file,
EPUB now.
So there were loads of these different companies, little companies, because the issue that you had as an independent author back in the day when this was first taking off, it wasn't so much about producing the files; it was about getting them distributed. How do you do it? How do you charge somebody? It was okay when I was giving stuff away because that was straightforward. You set up a download link and people can take it. But when it came to the sequels for Autumn and I wanted to start making some money from it, well, how did I do that? Because e-commerce was just a very small thing back then, and there was no way that you could do it for yourself until PayPal really took hold a few years later. So there were a lot of us using very odd, obscure ebook sites. NoSpine.net was one, I think. And I think it was called Ebook Ad, and that's where I first came across Jeff Strand, because there weren't many people selling on there. So if anybody had got anything like an audience, they immediately went to the top of the charts. And I remember that he and I used to kind of jostle for position at the top of the charts because people were buying the Autumn books and his books. But it's great. He's done really well for himself. He's made a great career for himself with it. So
he's a great author, and he's a wee bit different because obviously horror often is quite dark and dramatic and things. And Jeff's books are really, really funny. It's like black comedy. Like I must have read 20 odd of Jeff's books as well, and they're a wee bit different for everything else. You know what I mean? As I say, and that's his particular flavour. It works really well for him. And
like you said,
I remember a really early ebook that I bought it, and it was Jeff Way. I mentioned the other day as well. Blake Crouch, I think, and Jake Rath and somebody else, might be F. Paul Wilson. It was called Dracula's, and I read it, and the four of them had sort of co-wrote it. But it was in the very early days of Kindle, so a wee bit later than ebooks, but Kindle had just sort of come onto Amazon, and I think it might have been the very first Kindle book I bought, and it's back when Kindles were just a sort of black screen or a greeny, black screen with just the text, and it was amazing at the time. Like they would last for days on end. You didn't really charge them up often, and it was a great time. But I bought Dracula's, and after you finished the book, there was probably 3 times as much extras. So say the book was 300 pages. I think they had about 9 or 1,200 pages of extras. This is why we've done this. This is a side. I can't remember exactly what was in it. Now that's kind of fell away. People don't really do that anymore. Normally the Kindle book's the same as the paperback book, same as a hardback book, and the audio book, and everything else is kind of almost, word for word. But I remember that was quite a big thing for me to start as well, because again, it was getting to know the author a wee bit. They were telling you a bit about how they co-wrote it or how this came about and stuff. And you were never going to get that in a paperback, because the more pages, the more cost, and then you need to charge people more. And if it's too expensive, people don't want to buy it. So I thought that was a great thing in the elite books as well. A wee bit sad that's kind of went away, but I know people are everyone moves a bit faster. You kind of jump from one project into the next project, I think.
I don't know if it's disappeared completely. I know what you mean, because it's something that I really like. I love the fact that with Kindle, you haven't got to worry about any production costs. So you can write something that's as long as it's going to be.
Yeah.
I hate reading a book that's a doorstop like that should have been half the length. But often, when you sign a contract, I remember when the Autumn and Hater books were signed with when I signed them with St. Martin's Press and Thomas Dunn Books in America, they specified kind of the word count you should be aiming for.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that's fine if you've got a story that's going to fit that, but if you're trying to tell a story that's not going to fit that, you lose the freedom, and you can compromise the story. So I've done quite a few novellas, which I've known are never going to be novel length, but it's something that I can just write and not worry about the length, and then just put it out. And we were talking a while back about the latest Autumn trilogy, the last 3 books. Well, as I was writing those, I had lots of different subplots and things which I didn't want to include because they'd kind of distract from the main story.
Yeah.
But what I was able to do after the 3 books were finished was go back and write shorts for those little diversions, and then put out an anthology version of the 3 books with those little stories wrapping around it.
Yeah.
So there's you might meet this odd group of survivors who you've never come across until this scene, almost at the end of book 3. But they've got a story as well. But if I was to tell that, then it would be a massive diversion from the story, and any excitement, any pacing I'd got would have been lost. So you could just have it. And with ebooks and with audiobooks as well, to an extent, you can kind of control the navigation. So it's almost like a choose your own adventure book. We can get to that point in the book now. It says, do you want to know how these people got here? We'll go back to this story. Do you want to just carry on with the main novel? We'll just carry on with this chapter. And it's been really interesting. I've absolutely loved it.
I think
the audiobook.
It was good for changing the market too, because when the big publishers were controlling everything, as you see, if you get the thing out and they said it needs to be 300 pages, which I think was a kind of standard for a lot of publishers, and as you see, a lot of the books, they just didn't need to be that long. 300 pages isn't too long a book, but it is if the book doesn't deserve to be if it's a 100-page story, but they've just, put bits cut. And the thing is, as well, publishers would cut bits out your book, probably shorten it down, then you'd need to fill that back up as well. And as I mentioned to you, I like a novella. I think if that's all you need to say, that's. And I love books like Swan Song's one of my favorite, right up the top of my favorite books. I think it's 1,200 pages. Probably depends on what you have, but it's a brick, and it needed 1,200 pages. It was brilliant. I think I don't like to use the word perfect, but I didn't feel that there was any wasted space in the book or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I have read a book at 300 pages and thought, well, that could be 100 pages shorter. And it's time wasted, because, I used to say I don't like slow burn horror, but it's not really true. I like really well written slow burn horror. I don't like books that just are slow because they're dragging. That's the reality. As I say, I like some slow burn, but it needs to be really intentional, and it needs to be that sense of dread, and you're still interested in the stuff you're reading because the character's great or whatever, although there's no loads happening and things like that. But I think Kindle opened up a bit of a market where people could do what they want. Please themselves.
I think you're right. I think when I'm writing, every sentence has got to be there for a reason. And I'm not saying I'm pedantic about the words I'm using. What I'm saying is I don't want to give you some unnecessary detail that's not going to add anything to the overall story. I want everything that I say to be there for a reason. I'm not going to go off on wild diversions if they don't add anything to the plot. So yeah, it's a balancing act, and I know different writers do it differently. Stephen King obviously writes huge books, and he does go off on diversions, doesn't he? But you know,
Who's going to tell him
that's
no?
what works for him. No, I'm absolutely not.
Who's
I'm
going
not
to
saying
end it?
it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that I do it very differently.
I agree, and I think I don't know if you've read any of his son, Joe Hill, if you've read any Joe's books, but
Yeah.
I read quite a few of Joe's books when he just kind of come on the scene, and from memory, Heart Shaped Box was the first book, and
Hmm.
it's, I don't know, 250, 300 pages. It was fairly thin from memory, and I loved it. I thought it was brilliant, absolutely fantastic book. Everybody's got their own taste, but I thought it was great, and I've always been one that felt that King goes on a bit too long and he loses me in his stories. I don't read a lot of King. I was always more a fan of authors that were more similar to Richard Lehman with that pacing. And then he brought out his, I might get the order wrong, but I think his second book might have been Horns, and it was a bit bigger, and I quite enjoyed it. It was still a good book.
Hmm.
And then I read NOS 4R2 or
Oh
4A2. I
yeah,
think it depends if you're
yeah.
reading the American or the British copy. It's
Hmm.
slightly different title, but Nosferatu, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I liked it, but it was longer again. And I thought he's
Hmm.
turning into his dad. He's just going to write and write and write until the books are. And then I think the Fireman or something, was it the Fireman? Something came out. I think it was
Yeah,
the
that's one of his
Fireman,
books. Yeah, yeah.
and it was humongous. And I just thought, I can't be
Hmm.
bothered. I just can't be bothered. And that's why I fell away from him. Whereas if his books had stayed a wee bit thinner,
Yeah.
I'd have probably continued to read them. But I felt he was getting a wee bit too wordy, and the story wasn't always, to me, necessary. Some people love that. And I suppose,
Hmm.
again, it's all down to taste. If you like reading massive books and just being in the one story for ages, but a bit more like what you've done with the sequels and then occasionally some short stories involved. I'm more likely to follow a series. That I'm reading at the moment the last book in the Helldiver series. So there have been
Hmm.
12 books. Um, and then he kind of re-released the first book with a novella at the back here. I think that's what he'd done. And I would rather every few months pick up a new book that's a kind of enclosed story, but a
Yeah.
continuation as well. And
Yeah.
but that's the story. And have the 300 pages and then go and read other stuff in between. As I'd mentioned,
Yeah.
life takes over as well, and everybody's busy these days. And it's like,
Yeah.
how much time do you have to just sit and read?
Yeah, it's just it's
And
personal preference, isn't it? And it's
yeah,
what your audience wants from you. That again, going back to that Autumn trilogy, it was written as one story originally, or planned as one story. So there was no reason why I couldn't have put it out as one book. But for
yeah,
me, it just felt, and I did eventually. But for me, just releasing it one book per year, that felt like the right thing to do. And there
yeah.
were key points in the story where it felt like, well, that's an end. We're going into something. These characters are going into something different now. Do I want to just carry on writing this book, or do we save that for the next volume? And so that's the route that I've gone down. But it's each to their own, and
How did
it's
it?
what works for you, isn't it?
And you've probably spoke about it before, but for the sake of anybody watching, how did it come about that it was picked up as a movie?
Autumn. Well, yeah, it was a very weird time. So I, I'll talk about Hater at the same time, if you don't mind, because the two things
I was
happened.
going to come on to
Like,
Hater anyway, so I
okay,
fire in.
but they're all kind of tied in with each other. So it was 2006, I think. Yeah, 2005, 2006. I'd been writing autumn novels and I'd got three out and they were doing quite well and they were bringing me like half of what I needed to live on. So I was thinking that's half an income. And my thinking, because I was still working in a bank, my thinking was, okay, just write three more books. So I just thought I'll write three more novels and then hopefully if I can keep the same level of interest, then I can then I can quit my work and I can write full time. It didn't work out that way. It went very weird. So the first book of those three that I've been planning was Hater, and I wrote Hater in something like 3 or 4 months. It just flooded out of me. Put it out. Didn't think anything of it at the time. It was doing quite well, selling in line with everything else. I was really happy with it. And then I got this email out of the blue from America saying, "Oh, we'd like to talk to you about the film rights." Thought it was a wind up, and it wasn't. But the reason I mention it is because that happened at the same time as Autumn, because everything was kind of taking off together. And literally within days, I'd had an email from the studio in America, in Hollywood, saying, "Can we buy the film rights for Hater?" And then at the other end of the scale, this very small indie company said, "Oh, we really like Autumn. Could we buy the film rights for that?" And so I'm sitting there, never having had any real interest in my books before, with these two deals, and I thought, what the hell? I'll just go for both of them because there's a chance that one of them will get made. And so I signed both at the same time, pretty much. Like I say, one was full on Hollywood and still hasn't been made, and the other one was small indie Canadian and was made. It kind of disappeared for various reasons. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen the film?
I've not seen the film. No, I don't know where it's
Probably for the
available. If
best.
I'm honest, like,
Yeah, it's probably for the best. The people who made it, they made it with like absolute heart, 100% conviction, but they didn't have the cash or the technical skills really to do it justice. And it actually came out as it was quite a mess, to be honest. It had a good cast. It had Dexter Fletcher, who'd been in Lock, Stock and films like that, who, as a result of starring in Autumn, went on to directing because he didn't want to be in films anymore after the experience he's had with my film. And he went on to make films like Bohemian Rhapsody and Eddie the Eagle and the Proclaimers film Sunshine on Lease. So he's done really well for himself.
brilliant.
But the film was pretty completely panned. It didn't help that it had David Carradine in it. You know David Carradine from Kill Bill.
All right, aye.
Yeah, so he was Bill in Kill Bill. So he starred in it, which was amazing. I didn't get to meet him, but I've got an autographed copy of Death Race 2000 over here on my shelves, which is just ace for me.
Brilliant.
He was absolutely brilliant, but he died just after the film had finished shooting. So whether they did it on purpose or not, I still don't know. But they leaked an unfinished copy of the film onto the internet, and it just exploded. It was everywhere for a little bit, but it was really awful, really bad unfinished version. And then the finished version wasn't too much better. It was like a brave try, but it wasn't great. So it's been kind of lost. And then we got screwed over by the distributors who distributed it, but also distributed our cash to everybody but us, pretty much.
Right, okay.
So it wasn't a great experience, but then I was always told it's better to have a crap film made of your book than no film at all.
Well, there's not an awful lot of authors get their books made into films. It's for a lot of people, it's a dream. And I think you said that obviously your dream kind of was to do movies before you get into the books and that. So it's a shame it didn't work out.
But yeah, no, it was great. It's a great experience. If you don't want to
I
back
was
my
going to say,
head
it's
for a
still an
second,
experience you've had.
I've got something. I've got a copy. Here it is. There's my autographed copy of Death Race 2000. I'm sure he autographed it somewhere. Autumn.
Well, I've seen the cover.
Yeah,
The cover.
but that's me.
Aye.
That was so cool. So they said to me on the last night I was there, it was filmed in Canada, and they said, do you want to come over for a week? It was just before Christmas 2007 or something like that. And I said, yeah. And then on the last night before I was due to fly home, they said, oh, do you want to be a zombie? And obviously you're going to say yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a scene in that about halfway through with me fighting with Dexter Fletcher in the snow about 3 o'clock in the morning in Canada. It was just ace. So it was worth it for that experience.
Let's talk about experiences. Do you know, this is, you probably laugh at this, but I don't know if you've watched the Rise of the Foot Soldier movies.
I haven't. I think I've seen a couple, but yeah, I know of them. Yeah.
Again, they're British movies. I don't know how many people in America have seen them, but they're about they start off about a sort of football hooligan guy. But people maybe know about the Essex Boys murders. So one of the guys that was murdered in the Range Rover killings was a guy called Pat Tate, who was a bit of a gangster, and people say a bit of a bully and things like that. So after the first movie, the main character, Carlton Leach, isn't really in it. It's about Pat Tate. So they're kind of backstories because he dies in the first movie. So everything after that's a prequel. And Pat Tate's played by Craig Fairbrass.
Oh yeah.
Who's been in a lot of movies. He's in a few Netflix movies and things like that. And I like the guy. He plays a kind of. He's always a gangster, and everyone is another hard man. But I find him quite watchable, and I like the movies. They're easy watching. So I think there had been four or five of the movies out, and I seen an advert for the sixth one saying we're looking for extras, and I thought I'd love to be an extra in that just because I watched the movies. And
you did it, yeah.
I looked into it, and then it ended up, it was, I can't remember if it was £200 or something you'd to pay to be an extra. And the normal extras, I think, it paid a few quid. But in this, it was a reversal. You paid them to be in it. And I thought, do you know what? I'll do it once in my life. I've no aspirations to be an actor, or to be an extra or anything like that. I thought, but I'd like to have a wee, just appear in one of these movies, because I'll probably watch it a few times. So I paid the money, but then you had to go to, you could either go to London or Essex. But it's everything's, a lot of it's, the movies are set in Essex. That's where it all happens. So I thought, well, I'll go to Essex. I've never been to Essex. I'd like to see it. And my initial plan was to drive. My wife kind of talked me into it. So then it was like, right, well, I need to get flights. And then when you get a flight to London, you need to get a train to Essex. And so the money kept piling up, and this became quite an expensive going to be an extra, standing in the background while you see me kind of thing. And then we got down there, and I went for 2 days. And then the first day, everything went wrong. They couldn't film in the pub. The light was wrong. They couldn't move things into certain places. Just everything went wrong. So we were there for hours before they started filming. And then when they started filming, and it wasn't working, that they sort of cancelled it on. And then in day 2, there was 2 different scenes that I wasn't going to be in, and then you had to be there for the third one at the end of the day. So there's loads of hanging about again. And then basically the scene was in a Chinese restaurant. You were sitting, and a guy who comes in one door covered in blood, he's been chased by Pat Tate, runs through the restaurant, falls through a table. There was a stunt guy, the trick table of this, and it was interesting to see the other side of the camera, how they'd done it. And then he goes at the back, and then Pat Tate comes chasing him through, and you have to look up, obviously, because there's this maniac chasing him through, chasing this guy called Blood. So anyway, all this goes on, and then I have to travel all the way back. On the way back, the train lines were flooded, so what should have been 8 or 9 hours turned into about a 13-hour journey home. And it was just, the whole thing was a bit of a disaster. And I thought, well, do you know what? At least I'm an extra in this movie. It's cost me a fortune. I've spent a full weekend and all this time travelling. I didn't really enjoy it at all, but I've been in the movie. And then when you watch the movie, unless you spent a lot of time with me looking at my face, you would never, ever see me. You see me, what was a restaurant with maybe 40, 50 people in it, in the movies, and a bit of a club with about 200 odd people, in the way they've cut it and everything. And the camera at one point pans past me in this room full of people, and only because I'm looking for it, I seen it. So my only sort of movie thing was an absolute disaster, but it was an experience that I'll never forget.
But it's the experience, isn't it? That's the thing. I know one thing that I was told when I was there for Autumn. Somebody said to me, it's like an old cliche apparently, the most exciting day you'll ever have is your first day on a film set. The most boring day you'll ever have is the second day on a film set.
You know, been there and done it.
Yeah, but your extra thing is really interesting. I don't know if you know Adam Millard. Would you know?
Yeah, I know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah. So Adam's he's a lovely guy. I haven't seen him for years. I know he's had a few health issues recently, but we were very friendly back in the day and did lots of events together. And I know that he was an extra here in Brum, because Buddy Spielberg turned up to film Ready Player One. That's what it's called, isn't it? Ready Player One, I think.
Yeah. There's a second book,
I
don't think they've made the second movie, have they?
No, that's right. Yeah. So he ended up being an extra for Spielberg at the back end of Birmingham. So it can, you just don't know how it's going to work out, do you?
Yeah, I've no spoke to him lots. I've kind of spoke to him periodically over the years, and nice guy. And you know, as I say, I'm hoping to work with him more over the coming years and things like that. As I say, there's certain authors that I'll drop an invite to the books and that, but as you know yourself, sometimes people in the middle of writing a novel with a deadline, they owe a few short stories to a few different publishers that they're already signed up to. A lot of it's timing, there's guys that I've been working with for years, but I'll maybe only get a story every 2 or 3 years, because that's when they can fit it in. It's approaching, or sometimes it's approaching them with the right idea. I'm maybe doing a themed book and the theme isn't to their taste. So it's sometimes you go to somebody with an idea and they're like, I've actually been thinking about writing a story in that subgenre, and then obviously they're going to send you a story because it's somewhere for to go. They can get it out their head onto paper and things like that.
Difficult. Yeah, because you as a writer, I find if you want to do it seriously, you've got to be disciplined. You've got to put the time in, and I know I've felt really bad on occasions. I've had to say to you, I'm sorry, I can't do one at the moment, or I can't fit in, can't do it in time. but that's because I can't. Because if I get distracted, I'll go off on a tangent, and then I'll
I,
drop whatever it is I'm supposed to be doing. So
I
it's
completely understand. As I say, there's never any hard feelings. As I say, it's
yeah,
when I started doing this, the idea was to. I remember I said before the first book, if it never sells a copy, at least I'll have a book that I like. So
yeah,
there was no thoughts at the
nice one.
start about money, profit. There was no thoughts at the start about um, I'm going to work with this superstar or that. It was, I'm going to work with people that I've read their books and I enjoyed their books. Because it really heightens the chances I'm going to like the short story they send me. And that was the idea. I didn't go to everybody. I was in loads of groups with loads of authors promoting themselves. Some of them were upcoming and looking for opportunities. But everybody I invited was somebody I had read at least a novel or novella by.
Yeah,
Some of them loads. And, you're thinking, I really hope they get involved. They send me a story. But as I say, you know that it's not going to happen every time. And there's some authors that are in quite a lot of my books and probably have the idea that they're going to try and do every one of them.
yeah,
But there's just stuff in the road sometimes. And as you say, you need to be serious, you need to be dedicated. If you've got something in place and you're going to keep dropping it every time somebody comes with an offer, then you'll never ever finish it.
yeah,
As I say, and then you've got all your readers there sitting waiting on something that you've maybe mentioned you're doing, and you're away writing a short story for me or somebody else and things like that. So, and I've stuck to doing what I said. As I say, every book I put out, it's very rarely that I invite anybody that I've not read. If somebody's doing the rounds and the groups and everybody's talking about a book, then I go and read the book. And then if I like the book, then I'll say, well, listen, I read your book and I'd love to, I'd love a story off you for such and such. And as I say, it seems to work for me. And it's, I don't expect everybody to have the same taste as me, but if I'm putting a book out where I like every story in it, there has to be a lot of people out there that are going to like most of the stories in it as a minimum. And as I say, the books tend to have a fairly high average rating. So, you can only really trust yourself. I don't have a team of people wrapped around about me telling me that, oh, that's a good story, I'll work with this person. I do everything, I work with the cover designer. I'm not going to say I come up with every idea. I normally go to him with an idea and say, this is what I'd like. Sometimes I'll go to him and say, have you got any ideas? I've been working with Michael Bray for a long time now, and with the horror collection in particular, we're now putting together book 21, which is madness.
Crazy,
but it gets to that stage. They started off as colours, you had the gold edition, the black edition, the purple edition, and it went, and there was the odd themed book. So for Halloween, there was the pumpkin edition. And then after a while, we were sort of starting to run out of colours. So we went for things like the topaz, the sapphire edition, sort of gems. And the last one was a splatterpunk edition, which was themed. There was a sci-fi and a monster edition, but I overall probably prefer the unthemed books. I like a mixture. There's probably more rejections with a theme book because you might get three great stories that are too similar, and you're not going to put the three of them in the one book as much as you might love the three of them. I like unthemed stuff because you get a great variety, a great mix, and every story's sort of fresh. But I need to go to Bray now and I'll say if you get any ideas for the next edition because it's unthemed and I don't know what do we do with it.
It's interesting what you say about working with other people and doing it on your own. Because I had a period of time. I started off completely independent, then had a period of time working with a big press in America, St. Martin's Press. But I've really enjoyed. I'm not saying a lot of my books are still with them, so I've still got a relationship with them. But I really love the freedom of independent publishing.
Yeah.
When I was writing the second Hater book, it was the first time I'd ever worked writing a new book with an outside editor, and I had two editors for that, one in New York and one in London, and the battles that we had to get the book written, because I'd say, oh, I'm doing this, and then one of them would say, oh no, why don't you try that, and then somebody else would say, oh, why don't you try this, and we went round and round literally for about 2 years, and then the book that they both ended up accepting was pretty much what I'd written to start with. All right, it wasn't completely the same, but I think you've got to have. It was a big learning point for me. You've got to have strength of your own conviction. You've got to. If you're 100% behind this and you've got the vision, again, sounding really pretentious, you've got to go with it and you've got to get it there. I'm not saying that you don't benefit from other people having input, but I find that I really enjoy the. I like the almost like being a dictator with my stuff. This is how
Listen,
I
I'm
want
the
it. This is how I'm going
same.
to do it.
I remember I used to describe myself as a control freak, and then I remember I watched a thing and it was some guy talking, says, well, you're not, says people tell you that, but actually you've just got standards. You get things that you've decided that this is how this needs to go, and not everybody's going to like that. But as I say, I mean, I'm no unknown. As I say, I work with that cover designer, Michael Bray. Well, Michael Bray's a horror author too. I don't know, you've maybe read some of his stuff, but he's also a graphic designer as a day job, and he produces some great stuff. So he definitely, we work really well together. Sometimes, as I say, I go in with my idea. Sometimes he comes up with the idea. Sometimes we bounce it back and forward and tweak it and change it. And we always come to somewhere happy with. I do use an editor, but I suppose I decide if there is a theme or no. I pick the authors that I want to invite. I then read the stories and decide what stories are going to go in the book. I'll decide in the story order. The editor that I use, is there to kind of help me make sure that the book's as tight as it can be at the end, with the spelling, the grammar, no plot holes, stuff I might miss. You'll probably know you can read a story 10 times, but sometimes the story's in your head then, so you're missing things that are actually on the page. So it's good to have somebody else, but I think I do like that level of control where
I'm definitely not like decrying the role of the editor, because editors are invaluable, and I always use editors.
Yeah.
But it's slightly different when you're dealing with a traditional publisher, because it's business to them.
Well, Richard Lehman spoke about it in A Writer's Tale. I don't know if you've ever read his non-fiction book. It's kind of semi-biographical book. And I think he mentions The Cellar, which might have been his first book. There was a lot of pushback to change things, and he didn't feel he had the control. And then I think there was something to do with whatever they wanted for the second book was different for him. But years later, his daughter Kelly Lehman had found a sort of box in the loft or the attic or whatever you want to call it, and it was his book, The Woods Are Dark, which I don't think he'd been happy with all the edits. It was really forced upon him. That might have been that might have been the second book, I'm not sure. But again, I read his A Writer's Tale 20 years ago probably. But what she done was she pieced together the original manuscript, and she put it was after he died, she put the book out as he intended it, and it was a better book. But even in the early stages, when he was probably still learning as a writer and still coming into himself, he wrote a better book without somebody meddling with it than what the editors had changed his book to. And I know he was never happy, he spoke about that. And you just think, he's the writer. I know the editor's got a job to do, but at the same time, and as you say, it's a business. That's the problem. It's all about what they think will make money. And
I will also say
let my cat out.
Right.
Circling my feet until I let it out the door.
I will also say that I've had really positive experiences with editors when they've suggested things. When I wrote the second Hater series, the first book there, it finished much earlier, the original version, but my editor at St Martin's Press said, well, hang on a minute, I think we need more here, we can go further, what about taking it to this point? And it was the conversations I had with him that really shaped the end of that novel, and that set the scene for the rest of the series. So again, I'm not at all trying to say that the writer is always right, but I just think over the course of these experiences, it's been a learning process for me as to the writer's got to be able to say, this is here for a reason, this is why I want this is my overall plan, and have that discussion with an editor.
A lot of people used to speak about, and I probably pronounce his surname wrong, but Don Dioria, I think it is, and he was the editor at Leisure Publishing when they were just doing amazing. And I know there was catastrophes, and I know authors never get paid at the end, and I know there's a lot of bad stuff happened, but before any of that came out, and and they were just, it was a lot of original stuff, and then some of the books that they were bringing out was books that had been published before, but that were really solid horror. And I was picking up everything that they read, but I've heard quite a lot of the authors that I followed for years after that mention him really favourably, although the publishing company probably let them down. And I've heard a lot of people say that he did make their stories stronger with suggestions and things. And there's probably a difference, though, between editors that are giving you suggestions and asking you for more to the ones that are telling you to change your story or telling you what they want, you know, because there would be an element with me where I'd be saying, well, write it. No, you go and write it then, because it's your book. And when you do eventually publish it, I think looking at Layman and hearing him have regrets about books that he released, it's probably easy to talk about it when you've got 20, 30, 40 books out and you've got loads of fans and people are buying your stuff and you can say, well, I was right, I knew what I was talking about. It's probably really difficult with your first book and your second book and you're trying to get that money and move away from the day job and things like that. So people don't always have that control. There's always going to be good and bad experiences for people.
I guess, and that's what I'm saying. You've got to be open to it, but at the same time, there are occasions where you've got, you know, where the story's going to go, and you know what you want. You've got to be prepared to fight your corner a little bit.
Yeah,
but so I do like the freedom of being an independent author, but then maybe that goes too far the other way, and you end up writing something really self-indulgent that's only going to appeal to yourself. It's about getting the balance, isn't it? I think beta readers are really important there.
You want a book that you love. You want to, that's what they say, write what you love. But you need an audience. If you put the book out and nobody reads it, then it's a bit disheartening. You know, I think when you put the new book out, there's always a bit of trepidation as the reviews start to come in. Are people going to like it? Is this one going to land well? I mean, you're worried about sales. You know that you need to sell a lot of copies to get a lot of reviews, and there's loads of worry there. But as the reviews start to come in and you see that people resonate with the book and people really enjoyed it, and it's a great feeling. And it's probably that's the addictive part of it as well. It's not, you know, I mean, of course, it's not just the money. A lot of people that are probably writing the day probably don't make a lot of money. You know, a lot of writers have got a day job and they're writing in the evenings, the weekends, they're writing on lunch breaks anytime they have. So if you're not making money, that's certainly something that's still there for you when people are reading the book if they're enjoying it.
Let's be honest, it's a really stupid business to get into, isn't it? Because what other job are you going to do where you're spending, I don't know, anything from 6 months to a year to 2 years writing something that you're then going to give away? You're going to put in this great big massive Amazon marketplace along with millions of other books and sell it for £3 or whatever. You know, it's great. It makes no sense. And I was a bank manager back in the day, and all my bank manager brain still keeps saying, "What the hell are you doing, mate? Come on."
There has to be easier businesses. I've seen a thing, probably Facebook or Twitter somewhere, and it says if you've decided to be an author, you've just gave yourself homework for the rest of your life. I thought that's so true. Every night, you know,
honestly,
I've got this to write, I've got this to edit, I've got this to format, I've got this to. There's just constant, you know. It's
at times it's the greatest. Go on, sorry.
I'm saying if you enjoy it.
Yeah, I was going to say at times it's the greatest job in the world, but also it still kills me. I've written like 20 something books now. I've had a decent level of success, but I've still got massive imposter syndrome. I still think, what the hell am I doing? I still read another author's book and think, why can't I do this? What's wrong with me? And
I've never heard any authors really say anything different. No, I think every author, you know, I don't know if it ever goes away. It probably does for some people.
No, I'll tell you my experience, like 30 years in, it doesn't go away. And I sit here day after day typing this stuff. And every day I'm thinking, yeah, I'm happy with this. I love this. This is great. Finish it. And the book I finished a couple of weeks ago, I said to my missus, this is it. This is the one. This is really good. This feels like Hater did. And this is going to do really well. And I've got so much confidence in it. And then I send it out to my beta readers and to my agent. Don't think anything of it. And then I wake up in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock in the morning, thinking, shit, what have I done? That's terrible. Why did I say that? Why did I write that? You know? And it's like you go from this massive high to this absolute rock bottom low. And it's
there's no amount of great reviews will change it. You could have a million great reviews, but as you say, that next story, you go thinking brilliant, and as you say, you send it out into the world, and then you think, I don't know, beat read whoever, and you just think to yourself, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or why did I put that bit in? And it's your brain just it's self-doubt into it, as I say. It's there probably for the olden days to keep us alive, and now when we're sitting this here writing, and you need something to worry about. So
you get a bit more used to it, I guess, over time. But I remember back in the day, I said earlier that Autumn, half the people who read it really enjoyed it. Half the people hated it because they were expecting something completely different from a zombie story. And I remember just getting these reviews, crap review after crap review would come in because it wasn't what people were expecting, or they didn't like where it was set, or something. And I remember just unplugging my computer at one point and thinking, what's the point? I'm not going to do this anymore. But then you'll always go back and plug it in. And then you'll get an email from somebody who said, oh, that really meant something to me. And then you'll get sales in and something, it's never mind homework, mate. It's a constant emotional roller coaster. It does my brain in.
I totally agree. And again, it goes back to, as I say, me taking probably the easy route. When I put an anthology out, again, when I started doing the anthologies, I thought, I'll put a story in every book. I mean, there's no fear of rejection. There's no sending it in and waiting. It's just my story goes in my book. And then I stopped that as well. My father passed away and I kind of stopped writing all together for a wee while. So it was just putting the books out. But there's less worry if I put a book out with 20 other people's stories. I mean, I still want the book to do well. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't want to have success for the book. And every book I put, I think is good. But if it's got my story in it, there's always more worry, because the review could be great. And it could be, why does Kennedy put his stories in the books? They're crap. Yeah. And that doubt's there. And I hadn't wrote much apart from the odd short story over the last 4 years. And then when I got the opportunity to work with Crystal Lake, who is a publisher I really like, and it was the Dark Tide series, and it was 3 authors to a book, and when I'd been speaking to Joe Minehart, who had said, look, we've just had an opening, one of the books is no happening now, an author had dropped out or something like that. He says, you would bring 2 authors with you, so I'm thinking, right, and Simon and Gord had put stories in a few of the books, and I'd been speaking to them a bit, and I loved their work as well, and I'm going to ask them, I'm going to ask them, they'll say no, I'm going to ask them, and the two of them had both said, oh, we like Crystal Lake as well, we've been working with you for a wee bit, go for it. So after emails back and forward and deciding on the theme, and the 3 had different ideas for vampire stories, but they were all quite vicious vampire stories, and we thought, we can make a good book with 3 of them. And then it was all fun up to that part, getting to work with Gord Rowland, getting to work with Simon Clark. This is, I've been reading these guys for 25 or 20 years, and God, I'm getting to it, and it's not just short stories in my book, and it was novella length. And then the realisation sets in, thinking, I've only ever wrote one solo novella, and the rest have been co-written. And I'm thinking, can I write another novella? I haven't wrote anything longer than 4,000 words for 4 years. How do I start? How do I do this? And it was just too good an opportunity to do it. So filled with self-doubt, also knowing that I'd picked 2 authors that had been in the game a lot longer than me and wrote really lengthy books. Simon's got some really big books out there. And, and having read their work and way before I had written a short story, and there was all this sort of pressure I was putting on myself. It wasn't, nobody else knew or cared. And they were brilliant to work with, absolutely fantastic. But every night when you sit down to think, right, I need to at least get 500 words or something. I need to move this story forward. I can't just sit with this self-doubt and think it's going to be terrible compared to their stories. Even if it's good, it's not going to be as good as theirs, and I'll be the odd man out. And all this stuff. And eventually you get to that finish line, and then rewrites and all the usual stuff. And then again, you send the story in to Crystal Lake, but we, each of the 3 of us, had sent the stories to each other. And I was the last one finished, so I had got to read Simon's story. I got to read Gord's story, and I'm telling him, my story's not as good. It's terrible. And oh God, this is going to be brutal. And now that it's out there, and I would have always regretted it. See, if I dropped out or pulled out, I would have regretted it the day I died. And I'm finishing to put it out. Now that the reviews are starting to come in, people are saying that they love all 3 stories, that they're brilliant. Nobody's really.
Which is great.
And they're saying, oh, Kevin's story doesn't stand up. It just shows that it's self-doubt, I'm never going to turn around and say that I'm as good a writer as either of the 2 guys. I think I've managed to write a novella that sits well in the book with their 2 novellas, which is a massive achievement for me. I'm happy with that. It's a bit of a milestone in my kind of horror career.
And you've done that, that's for sure, because I've read your story, but I'm not going to say anything because I haven't read the other 2 yet. But I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to seeing how it fits with the other ones. So I will get back to you.
They're very different stories, and I quite like that as well. I think you need a bit of variety when you're reading a book with the same theme. If they were all quite, if it was like 3 gothic vampire stories, by the time you get to the 3rd one, going to be bored of it probably. So no, I think it's worked well. Just it's definitely something I enjoy doing. But it's been another kind of thing when self-doubt kicks in. I can think, well, I've done that, I finished that, I forced myself through that, and I think every time you kind of do, as you've said, it gets a wee bit easier. You still feel it, but it gets and I'm sure in 10 years' time it'll be a wee bit easier for me as well.
But it is a really vicious thing, and I know I had a bad time. It was a decade ago now. I came from the hater film thing that I mentioned a while ago. That was huge for a while because Guillermo Del Toro bought the film rights, and suddenly everybody wanted a bit of hater, and then people bought up the St. Martin's Press bought up the Autumn books as well, and they were chucking cash at me, and it was great. It was all brilliant, but those things never last. In your head, you think, "Oh, this is great. I'm set up now," but you only. It's great being the next big thing, but you're only the next big thing for a little while, and then somebody else is the next big thing. And it hit me like an absolute hammer blow. Honestly, I think I've been writing full time for about 6 years, doing really well. And then we moved into this house, so I took on a big mortgage, and everything was fine. And then suddenly, bang! Just the pressure and the ideas dried up, and I just couldn't do it. And when you get onto that downward spiral, it's really hard to get off again.
Yeah.
I ended up I didn't stop writing altogether, but I just walked away from it. And for about 6 or 7 years, I ended up working in a bloody civil service for some reason. It was the most dreary, boring job. Looking after the Dartford Crossing in Essex, going back to that. But it was so different from what I had been doing, and that kind of reinvigorated me. And then a few things happened at home, and I was able to go back to writing full time again. But it's a real pressure. It's hard. It's really hard. I love writing. I find writing easy, but not under pressure. I can pay the bills for money I've made with books, but I can't write a book to pay a bill, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it's a funny thing because I think if you're doing something manual and you're not having a good day, you can kind of force yourself to go and still go out. If you do the garden, for example, you can just go and do it feeling terrible. But when you're in the totally wrong headspace and you're sitting in front of a computer, you can just sit and look at that blank screen, that blank page, and it's I would say almost impossible to put any words on it because your mind's in 12 other places. That's a difficult thing. Obviously, we spoke a bit about your two big sort of series, but I think just before we started recording, I'd mentioned to you because it'd been a few years since I'd read a lot of your books that I wanted to read something fresh. But these days, we've just been busy with a load of stuff. I tend to read predominantly novellas. And to be honest with you, novellas suit my taste. Most novellas are really fast-paced. The story's compressed, and there's a lot of stuff packed into maybe 100 pages. And as I say, I can read that in a day or two, as opposed to maybe sitting a book down. Because I can maybe read a book for 2, 3, 4 days, and then I put it aside for a week or two while I'm reading subs that people have sent me for my book. And as I say, edit format and all the other stuff. So a novella I can normally finish and not leave big gaps. So I really enjoy it. So I picked up your novella, Scratch, and it was fantastic. I absolutely loved it.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
So that Scratch is part of a series. I noticed that because of the covers. And a few years back, I had read Ian Rob Wright's book in the same series, which I believe are all zombie books. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was.
What was that series called?
Year of the Zombie, very originally. A lot of people might remember the name Wayne Simmons. Wayne's a great friend of mine. He's still about. He's just well removed from the writing genre now. He doesn't write at all. But he and I were really close for a while, and we worked on Infected Books, which is my little publishing company.
Yeah.
And we'd just been putting out our own stuff for a bit, and then we got to a point we thought, wouldn't it be great, now that we know all these other zombie authors, wouldn't it be great just to do something that's like an anthology, but a little bit different? So we picked, I think we ended up with 10 different people in the end, and Wayne wrote one and I wrote one, and we wrote a novella each, so a bit longer than your average short story. We're talking like 15, 20,000 words, and we put one out on the 1st of each month all the way through 2016, almost 10 years ago, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they did really well for us. Yeah, we had Adam Baker, who wrote Outpost, Mark Tufo, who's obviously huge with Zombie Fallout and all that,
Yeah.
Ian Rob Wright, as you've mentioned, and various other authors. And yeah, it was a blast. And I got August, so that's when mine came out. Scratch, a nice little sticky story about family dynamics, which mine always are. It's just the zombies are in the background. It's usually a dysfunctional family falling apart with zombies.
Yeah. It was good. The characters were great, and again, that's something that I think, I'm saying I love novellas, but for books with great character development, it tends to be the longer books because there's more time to build it up rather than just loads of these are the characters and then you're trying to squeeze a bit of story in. Often it's quite a fast-paced story, and sometimes you'll maybe get one character really well and the other sort of side characters aren't. But I thought the characters were great. The dynamic between were they still a husband and a wife? I know they're separated, but they're still married, or were they weren't
Oh God,
divorced?
it's so long since I've
I
read
don't
it. I
think
can't
it
remember.
tells you. They weren't long separated, so I'm guessing still married. But the separated couple and
family split up, and she's gone on holiday with the kids.
Campsite.
Yeah,
end up at the ex-partner's house.
Ends up having to take refuge at the ex's house. Yeah,
and the tension obviously is good because it's doubled up because you've got the tension from the zombies, but you get the tension of just being in the situation. And let's be honest, most people have had a difficult relationship at one point in their life or other, so you can feel it. It was really well written. As I say, I really enjoyed that.
Cool.
It was nice to get something. And as I say, I was able to read that over 2 days as well, which is nice because I say it's difficult finding time these days. But no, that was brilliant. Have you got anything upcoming? Any releases coming out over the next few months or the next year?
Well, I've just a couple of months ago released a book called Shadowlocked, which is very different for me. It's not apocalyptic because most of my stuff is.
Yeah.
It's about there's a couple. It's more of a thriller, but with supernatural elements. There's a couple on their way home from a party late at night, and they go off the road, go off a bridge, end up at the bottom of a river. He gets out, she doesn't. And basically the story is he's convinced they've been forced off the road by somebody else. She comes back to him as a kind of ghost, perhaps something, and they try and work out between them what happened because he's convinced that they were run off the road, but the police have got CCTV and there were no other cars around. And basically, it's one of those stories where nothing's as you initially believe it is.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I've just really enjoyed. I've had the freedom now to write different stuff. So it's been good to move into completely different genres. I never describe horror as a genre because to me, a horror story can be anything.
Yeah.
It's horror as an emotion. It's not a genre to me. I always say when I'm talking about this, look, somebody says, "Oh, I've written a Western," you know what you're going to get. But if somebody says, "I've written a horror story," well, that could be anything, just where horrible things happen. So yeah, so that was my last release.
Genres are just for sales. Publishing companies and Amazon
absolutely.
and place what I put in a category, but a lot of the categories are really widespread. So as I say, as it's and what you might write a book and think, well, it's this, and somebody else might read it and say, oh, it's this actually. So it's not really. It's just so as I say, people can categorise it and group it together and things like that. Is that the sort of plan then? So as you said, obviously you love a post-apocalyptic story. I love a post-apocalyptic story. Is the plan for the foreseeable future to do stuff a bit different for that, or have you not really marked it out?
Yes and no. So I've just finished another book called Dirty Day, which is with my agent at the moment. So I don't know what's going to happen with that yet. But that again is something very different. That's a real-time novel, if such a thing exists. So there's no chapters in it. There's just minutes, and basically a guy. Sounds like a bad joke. A guy walks into a toilet, and in the Brent Cross shopping centre in London, and he's on his own in there, and he hears a phone ringing. Looks around, finds this phone in one of the cubicles, picks it up. Woman at the other end says, "Oh, thank Christ for that. You don't know how important this phone is. You've got to get it to me in the centre of London by 1 o'clock, which is like an hour and a half away." And it's the hour and a half that he takes to get from where he's there to where she is, and everything that happens and everything that he learns in the meantime. And it's another one where it's not what it seems. There's some apocalyptic overtones, but I can't say too much about that at the moment.
Yeah.
But I'm fortunate. I'm in a position where I can experiment a little bit. There's stuff that I'm not allowed to talk about going on with the Hater film. So, I'm hopeful that that's still going to happen.
Brilliant.
And I've reached the stage in my life where I am just about okay to write full time. So I am kind of taking this opportunity to experiment and just try and get out to different audiences.
Good.
I'm also always really precious about my first drafts and about my works in progress, and I never let anybody see them. But just to push myself right outside my comfort zone, I'm trying something different. I've got a new book called Kemberton, which I'm working on, which is like a full-on horror novel, and that's going to be serialized. Every time I write a chapter, that's going to go up on a website that's just for my newsletter subscribers. So if people go
Okay.
to davidmoody.net, sign up for my newsletter, each month you get an access code that will take you to a separate website where you'll be able to read this novel with new chapters added every week or every couple of weeks. That's going to start next month.
Right, okay.
But yeah, loads of things on the go. And an apocalyptic mafia story, which is the next one I'm working on.
That sounds amazing. I'm definitely up for that. I was just going to go back to what you were just saying there about the sort of weekly or every few weeks kind of thing through the
Yeah.
newsletter. Is that, I might have it wrong because it's not something I've used yet, but is that a wee bit like what people are doing with Kindle Vela at the moment? Is that like a
Yeah.
sort of serialised type of?
Yeah, I think it is. But with that, I mean, it's monetized by Amazon, isn't it? So you buy chapters. And I don't know how big that's been. I've only seen it available in America. I don't think you could do it here.
Oh, I
But
didn't know that. It's
serialized
an
fiction,
American author I see posting about it fairly frequently, and I think it
yeah,
seems to be
I
going all
don't think
right
it's
for them.
available anywhere else yet.
Right, okay.
I don't know if it's something that excuse me. I can't see as a reader, I don't think I'd be prepared to pay little dribs and drabs to get a book. But what I'm doing with this one is I'm saying to people, if you're on my mailing list, fantastic, thank you, you can have this. But
Yeah,
then there's also on the website that's specifically for the people on my mailing list, it'll say, oh, if you've enjoyed this, write a review, or here's a download code, listen to this and review this book, or tell your friends. Here's a little widget to let you tell your friends about it.
yeah.
Just trying to kind of like self-market it, if you know what I mean.
That's a good idea. That's
So
definitely a
yeah,
good
so
idea. I
that
think that's the other thing as well. You can't just be a writer. You need to look for new angles as well. You can't just do what everybody else is doing because it moves on. So something's popular. You write a book and that's for the popular thing, and then everybody's moved on to something else. So
yeah.
you need to look at how you're going to market the stuff you want to write, the stuff you want to
Mhm.
release, and get it into new people's hands. And I agree with you. I think that I mean, as I say, I've seen somebody talk about it quite a bit. And I didn't realise it was only in America, the Kindle Vella. But
I think
I
that's the
think
case.
you've got the option of obviously a lot of people are on Kindle Unlimited these days and can read
Mm.
an insane amount of books for whatever they pay a month. I don't know what is it, 10.99 a month or something like that.
Something like that,
I
yeah.
don't think it's far off. And can really read as many free books as you want. And let's be honest, most people put their books on Kindle Unlimited. Now all my books are on
Mhm.
Kindle Unlimited, and they do. Um, I don't know the exact split, but they do probably as well as the Kindle books. There's probably a
Yeah.
fairly even balance between people buying them and people reading them through Kindle Unlimited. Paperbacks, I don't. I think paperbacks are vary between 60, maybe 10% of my sales,
Mhm.
and everything else is between Kindle and Kindle Unlimited. But if you can for £11 a month read an unlimited amount of novels, novellas, and anthologies and short story collections and everything else, would you still then have time to go and spend even a few pence on a chapter of
Yeah.
a book? I just think there's a lot of options these days. The market's opened up a lot for when you could go to your local bookshop and get whatever they had on the shelves. And as you know as well, David, in
Mm.
the UK, options were really limited.
Yeah.
When I used to go into before you came along, when I used to go into bookshops like Borders, and it would be mostly Stephen King, then a load of Dean Koontz, then a load of Anne Rice, few James Herbert, few Sean Hudson, and that was kind of your whack in a lot of shops. So when Amazon come along initially as just a book company, I was able to buy books for Cemetery Dance, for example, who were
Yeah.
publishing a lot of great authors. But if I bought it for Cemetery Dance, often the postage was the same price as the book.
As a
But if I
book,
bought
yeah.
it through Amazon, it was free postage or £2, £3 postage, which is madness when you think, because Cemetery Dance need to send it to them. But obviously Amazon had that network where they could ship some over to the UK, and it really opened up the volume of authors that I could read and who was available to me. And you know, I like a lot of British horror authors, but there's never going to be the same volume of British horror authors as you have American horror authors. It's a massive place, you know, and I read a lot of American horror and have done for, I suppose, probably previous to it being called indie. What I was looking at was mid-market horror through leisure, but they then obviously, a lot of these guys started doing kind of indie stuff with smaller publishers, and I loved everything like that. So it was good to be able to get the option to go and do it. But I think now that you've got Kindle and obviously audio, but I'm not an audiobook fan really. I've turned a few of my books into audiobooks, but I don't really listen to them myself, so I've never got that urge to sit and, if somebody does an audiobook for me, if I select a narrator I like, I still need to listen to the full thing chapter by chapter when they send it back to make sure it's okay. I maybe need to decline a few chapters or short stories if it's an anthology, and then re-listen to them, and it's really time consuming when I could just be putting a new book together. But as I say, as a reader, the options are just unlimited.
But when audiobooks work, they really work. I've got to say, going back to the Autumn trilogy I've just written and the omnibus version of that, I've got a brilliant narrator that I work with called Aubrey Parsons. He's just phenomenal. And there's like 60, 70 characters in this series of books, and this guy gives each one of them a different voice, and it performs the books rather than just reading them, and it's absolutely ace. And to be honest, at the moment, that's my best-selling book. It's bringing me in plenty of cash, and so I think that the market for audiobooks is just expanding exponentially in the same way that ebooks did 20 years ago.
Yeah, I see a lot of people saying that they listen to him, and I see a lot of people in horror groups asking for suggestions of what narrators are good, because I think it's no like a book where you get authors that you know you like their style of writing and you like the kind of stuff they're writing about, and you get a good sense that if you've read 6 of their books, you'll probably like the 7th one. I think with an audiobook, you might love the author, then you don't like the narrator. You don't like the way
it is make or break.
Voice. Yeah. So it's different. It's not down to what you've wrote. It's down to who you're working with as well. And I think for me, I've just never fully got into it. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not something I'll do. And what probably will happen is I'll probably every so often turn one of the books into an audio book, and through time it might continue to grow. As I say, I think I've done 8, 9 or 10. And it's just not where my focus is. And as I say, every time I finish something, I say I'm not going to do another anthology as well. Obviously, I'm going to write more, and then I'll just start an anthology. I've read these other 5 authors, and I want to get them to work with me now. And there's just always another project in that. So I'm just trying to spend more time writing and keep the anthologies going as well. So there's never enough hours in the day, is there?
No, tell me about it. Yeah. No, I'm kind of like semi-retired, and just write, but I still say that because if I'm supposed to be I sit here on my own most days, no distractions, but then the cats want feeding, or the washing needs emptying, or the doorbell rings. There's a parcel.
There's always something.
There's always something, and when you're in your flow, when you're in the zone, it's the last thing you need.
Well, I think, you know, the last guest that I had on, David Sodergren, I don't know if you've read David. He's a relatively new, he's a Scottish horror author that came on the scene, I don't know, 7 years ago, I think. I'm not sure exactly, but he's released 10 books and I've read 6 of them, and the 6 I've read have been brilliant. And again, probably read more of them before I got really into the flow with doing all the stuff I'm doing now. So again, it was novels mostly he's released, and I had a wee bit more time then. So that's why I'm sort of struggling to get to his newer books and things like that. But he was saying he's literally just finished working on a full-time job, and he's now writing full-time as well. And that's what he's got quite a lot going on now. I think it was sort of between 3 to 5 books almost at the finish line. Because you can focus on it, and your nose is distracted. As I say, if you've got to work 8 hours a day and just say you come in, you need to feed the cats, walk the dog, you know, take stuff to the tap, get the food in, cook the dinner and everything like that. It's squeezing into small periods of time, but it's amazing that you're back to the full times. I say I'm sorry to hear that things kind of went away for a while and you had a few years back
It's
at the
cool,
grind,
mate.
you know. But
Yeah,
it's good you're
no,
back at it.
I learnt a lot from it. You know, it was good to get back. I needed to do it. My missus was getting exasperated with me. She said, "How can you sit there and write about people when you don't know anybody?" Because I turned into this hermit. You know, it wasn't. I was in a bad place. So I'm really glad, and all kinds of things have happened since then. We had the pandemic. I had a heart attack, which like changed everything because I almost carked it in the living room, and then but fortunately was okay. But that kind of like changes your focus on absolutely everything. So unfortunately, I had an insurance payout, which took a lot of the financial pressure off. And then and like I'm 53, so I'm at the point now where I'm thinking, well, what do I want to do? What do we want? So
Yeah.
it's good. 10 years ago, we got 5 girls. We had 4 of them living at home at the time, and it was a totally different environment. Now I'm on the wind down. Hopefully, a long, long wind down, but
Yeah.
winding down nonetheless.
Well, it sounds like you're in a good place, and it's good, obviously, if you're getting more time to write, then we get more books. So that's always a
That's the
good
plan.
thing.
Yeah.
As I say, it sounds like you've obviously had a bit of hard time over the years, but you seem to be in a good place, as I say. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out next. Your new books that you've mentioned sound brilliant, so I'll have a wee look at them as well. But it's been amazing speaking to you, David. As you said, we've had a chat over a
Yeah.
long number of years probably, and never actually got to sit and have a conversation. So, and I've said to a few of the authors, when you've got new books out and that, if you give me a shout, we can maybe have a wee sort of shorter chat about that specific book and things like that as well.
Yeah.
So, we'll
That'd be great.
definitely
No,
stay in touch.
it's been good to finally chat properly, and it so. I can tell from your accent you're not local, so we're not going to be going down the pub for a pint. But
And,
no,
and do you know, there's so many horror conventions happening now in the UK that is getting more frequent. I think you're at the next one. Is it Canterbury? I'm not sure. I've seen your
I'm at
name on
one
one.
in Stourbridge, not far from here, in
All right,
October.
okay.
Yeah,
I've seen a few, and always look and always Google how far they are from where I live, and it's always a minimum of a 4.5 hour drive.
yeah,
And I probably wouldn't stay over that. I'd probably drive down and drive back. So you've got 9 hours
yeah,
of driving, which is doable. But I think these days it's the cost of the petrol and the diesel, and things
hundred
like that
percent.
as well. It's an expensive drive to go somewhere where I'm probably going to spend an awful lot of money in books.
No, no, I get that.
So I'm hoping
Yeah.
that there's more closer to Scotland, and I'll
Well,
maybe
I've
not
done a
go and
couple in
sell books.
Scotland. Yeah,
So
I've done a couple up there. I've done a couple up in Scotland. So yeah, if any more come up, I'd be more than happy to make the trip again.
there is one in a few months, a horror con. I don't know if it's just called the horror con. I know. I think Matt Shaw is going to it, and the author David Sodergren. I said, and
Right.
somebody said, I don't know if it's MJ Mars or somebody else going. I think there's only a few authors at it, so it's a horror. It's not like a horror book convention, which I think more
Yeah.
of the recent ones have been. It's just books and authors and things, which is probably more
Mhm.
my scene, to be honest with you. The few horror conventions that I've been to it was more movie stuff. Um, I drove
Yeah.
into one a few years ago in Stoke-on-Trent, and I think Matt Shaw was at that one. The Sinister Horror Company were there, one of the publishers. I
Mm.
don't know if they're doing anything anymore. And I met an author called Lex H. Jones, who's in quite a few of my books, but he was just there as like a visitor, same as myself.
Yeah.
But a lot of the rest of it was movies, and some of the folk were people that you wouldn't recognise, or you'd hardly heard of the movie and stuff, and it just probably wasn't really
I
worth
totally
it.
get it. It's depressing. I've stood with Matt at conventions, and we've been there, like just in this big pool of space because there's no one around us with all our books that we've like sweated blood to write, and everybody's over the other side of the hall because there's somebody who looks a bit like Negan from The Walking Dead. You know what I mean? It's just yeah, it's
It
getting
wasn't
like
for
so
me.
it's
I'm a
book
big reader.
specific.
I think,
Yeah,
again, we're talking about time constrictions. I don't watch nearly as much television as I used to. I'm really, really picky these days. Like, people tell me a show's great, I make it halfway through the first episode and probably give up before I give it a chance. But there's
mm,
that guilt. I'm sitting watching the telly. I could be doing this, or this. And that's
yeah,
something I do a lot with things. And I don't watch an awful lot of movies, or I maybe waiting a movie coming out for like a year. and then I put it on, and halfway through it, get distracted, put it off, and go and do something else. So when I go to a convention, I'm not that interested in movie stuff. I think, you know, some of the ones that are coming up now, where there's like 20 odd authors there selling their stuff's more my scene. But I think it will either need to be a bit closer to me, or maybe if me and my wife are going away for a weekend somewhere, try and time it where there's a convention so we can pop in for the day or something like that. So I've no doubt I'll meet you at some point, or I'll just need
to... no, definitely. Yeah.
Be good. But listen, as I said, thanks very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been great having a chat with you. As I say, having followed you over the years, I knew quite a bit of, you know, what you said and things like that, but I've found out some new stuff today as well, which is always interesting. So hopefully everybody else will find it interesting as well.
Bloody hope so. No, great. Well, thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
Tie everything up, David, and then I'll get a wee chat for you offline, okay?
Cheers.